The white-haired gentleman in the picture is Ernest Warther. He was born just about a mile from here in 1885 and born to very poor Swiss immigrant parents. Now, he lived right here in Dover his entire life. In fact, for 63 years of married life, he and his wife shared the brick home at the front of the property. And that's where their oldest daughter, Florence, continues to live today. As soon as they moved into that home, they laid out beautiful gardens, and in the summertime, our gardens are just magnificent, filled with all kinds of annuals and perennials. Some of those perennials, of course, are starting to come up. Well, in 1936, he built the original museum outside. That's the little brick building with the red tile roof. And that's where the carvings were housed until 1963, when he built a portion of this building. In '87, we quadrupled the size of the building, and just this last June, we again doubled the size of the building. So the carvings continued to grow for a while, and now the crowds continue to grow as well. Well, if you want to come down here, I'm going to show you some of Mr. Warther's early pieces. Now, he stumbled over a rusty pocket knife when he was 5, and he started to whittle and carve. And by 1916, he was doing pieces like you're seeing here. But he was a young man with a young growing family, and so he didn't have much money. And he would go down over the hillside and cut down a dead walnut tree. So that's why we have so many walnut carvings here for you to see. Then when his wife would make vegetable soup, he would take the beef bone out of the pot, bleach it in the sun until it was white. He used bone to trim and letter 15 of his early carvings. Now when he would travel, he would send home postcards, only he would carve his own. He could do one of these in just a couple of hours. He'd take the blank piece of walnut wood with him in his suitcase, and he'd sit in his hotel room and carve a message on one side, name and address on the other, and he could send them right through the mail for 2 and 4 cents. That was postcard rate. This one went all the way to Bombay, India, and that's why it has $2 worth of airmail postage on it. Well, today, Mr. Warther's youngest son, Dave, manages everything here along with his wife and 4 of their 6 children. You can see by this picture how much Dave looks like his dad. Dave is a wonderful carver, and he's taught that carving talent to his sons and daughters. But they all say that compared to their father or grandfather's talent, they are just whittlers. But it's been Dave's goal since he was in high school to keep his father's carvings right here in the backyard of the family and to display them as beautifully as possible. And you can see that he's won numerous awards for doing that. We're very grateful to Dave and the family for continuing to have this museum right here in Dover. Now, Mr. Warther made his living not with carving, but by making kitchen knives. And some of you have already been down in the knife shop. You folks that are just getting started will be down in the knife shop before we are finished here today, because the family continues to make their living in that way. But that's what you see them doing there in that picture. Now, Mr. Warther made a walking cane that looked just like this for Franklin Roosevelt back in 1933. And he sent it to Roosevelt, and that became one of Roosevelt's favorite canes. In fact, when the secretary typed up the thank you letter, she called it an elegant piece of workmanship, and Roosevelt didn't like elegant, and so he scratched out that wording and wrote in a fine piece of workmanship and mailed Mr. Warther the edited letter. He also rubbed shoulders with Dwight Eisenhower. There he is meeting Vice President Nixon and Omar Bradley, one of our 5-star generals. Now, hobbying was very important to this family. Mr. Warther always kept carving as his hobby. Mrs. Warther had her own hobby, and that was collecting buttons. She started to collect buttons as a little girl when she came to this country from Switzerland with her mother's button box. She continued to collect until she was about 60 years old, and then she started to sew them into beautiful designs. It took her 30 winters to do all of the sewing. She sewed 73,282 buttons into those beautiful designs. And that's what we have out there in the button house. See, you guys didn't have to count them at all. Out of the first 50,000, there were no 2 alike. And believe it or not, we have 65,000 additional buttons with no place to put them. Dave, again, and other members of the family are in the process of refurbishing the panels, fastening them on with copper wire rather than the old carpet thread or dental floss that his mother had used. And also, he is designing new panels of buttons. In fact, the ones that are in the ladies' room, you can see today, are fastened on with copper wire. So those are some of the newer designs. Arrowhead collecting was a hobby that they shared. There are over 400 in this table. He considered these to be his finest collection. He bought or traded for most of these. And down here in the workshop are 4,728 arrowheads. 90% of these were collected locally within a 10-mile walk of where you're standing right now. This little workshop was built right here in 1912. This is where all the carvings were done, and thousands of knives were made right here in this little shop. And we even have a piece on the bench right now that the family is doing repair work on. And they are very capable of doing all of that repair work when needed. Do you have questions for me? All right, let's move in this room. There's room for a few of you to have a seat if you'd like.
Ernest Mooney Warther was born 1885 in an old log schoolhouse in Dover, Ohio. He loved to tell people this was the reason he never needed much formal education. Mooney never knew his father, who died when he was a toddler, leaving his mother with 5 children, 20 cents, and a cow. The older boys took jobs to help keep the family together, but 5-year-old Mooney was too young to work in the local mill. So he helped by herding cows belonging to area families. He kept this job for 9 years, until age 14, earning a penny a day, and the nickname Mooney, taken from the Swiss word Munet, meaning bull of the herd. As 5-year-old Mooney walked the cows to pasture one summer morning in 1891, he made an important discovery. Buried in the soft brown dirt on the winding path was a dusty treasure that would help him carve his name into the pages of history and the hearts of millions. This simple moment would shape Mooney's future and enhance ours as he went on to sculpt beautiful monuments to our nation's railroad history. Mooney's first whittling tool couldn't model the brilliant career and splendid family life that lay ahead of him, any more than blades alone can refine a block of wood into a great masterpiece. It was Mooney's special vision, persistence, and love of carving that would craft these humble beginnings into works of unequaled artistry.
But I see them in the wood.
Mooney would see many things in the wood in the years to come. His chance encounter with a stranger at a railroad yard would inspire a piece that confounds mathematical experts to this day. The stranger had whittled something that worked. Wow! And that idea fired up Mooney's imagination.
Hey, mister, how'd you...
Though the stranger left without revealing the method he used to craft his crude pair of pliers, the boy's mind was as sharp as his blade.
Don't leave for tomorrow what you can do today.
He would better the idea and take it to a staggering extreme. In fact, the boy who practiced on bucket bottoms and fence posts would one day produce works of art so fine that presidents and billionaires would covet them. This is where the working genius of Ernest Mooney Warther would emerge.
And of course, that was the outside of that little workshop. Now, Mooney Warther quit school at the 2nd grade level. From then on, he was a totally self-taught man, but an avid reader and knowledgeable in many subject areas. He was 14 years old when he went to work at the American Sheet and Tin Plate Company to make more money for the family. He worked here for 21.5 years. And here's an actual picture of Mooney and his best friend and brother-in-law, Johnny Richard, working at the shears where they worked for many years together. The apron that he's wearing in that picture is hanging below. He added 9 pounds of chain onto that leather apron, and that allowed him to use his whole body to shove the sheets of steel into the shears to be cut. We even have a pair of his old steel mill shoes here, complete with homemade patches and homemade steel toe caps. Well, years later, completely from his memory, he carved these 2 mills out of walnut and ivory. Here again is the American Sheet and Tin Plate Company. Come on up. This is still one of my favorite carvings because of all the animation. The 2 mills are almost identical. It doesn't matter which one you're standing close to. Here you see Mooney and Johnny working at the shears. And here they are again. Here's Mooney and Johnny working at the shears, just like you saw them in the picture. Johnny Stutz is eating his favorite lunch, a rhubarb pie and Swiss cheese. He always ate his pie first, so that in case his lunch was interrupted, he had already had the best part. The foreman is firing Henry for falling asleep on the job again. And the Irishman, back here in the coal bin, Pat Murphy claimed the only thing that could wash down coal dust was buttermilk. Well, At least that's what the claim was in the bottle. It only took Mooney 9 months to do each one of these carvings, and that included the time needed to mechanize them. Those are mirrors on the floor, reflecting the workings right up underneath the box. He would use scraps of sewing machines, washing machines, bicycle spokes, anything he could get his hands on to mechanize the mill. He was a master at making something out of nothing. Now, since carving was his hobby, he refused to ever sell any of his carvings. He said, once you sell a hobby, it becomes a business and all of the rules change. But he did give away 17 carvings over his lifetime. 13 of those have been donated back to us, and the family knows where the others are. Pictures on the wall tell a lot more about Mooney's personal life. If you have time when you're finished with your tour today, come back up and read the captions under the pictures. And cameras are welcome anywhere that you'd like to use them, anywhere in the museum. Now, there were times when Mooney would be laid off, or sometimes the steel mill would shut down completely for lack of orders. And when that happened, he needed a new way to make a living for his family. That new way was making kitchen knives. The red-handled horizontal knife that you see here is the first kitchen knife that he made for his mom back in 1902. Mooney was 17 years old when he made that knife, gave it to his mother as a gift, and the neighbors would be in her kitchen and she'd show it to them, and they thought it was a great knife and they started placing orders. And that's how the knife-making operation got started. 100 years later, we're making 45,000 kitchen knives a year in the lower level of the building. Now, the knives that you see, the carvings, the pictures on the wall, everything in this room except for these 2 steel mills were done before 1923, so these are some of his early pieces. In fact, the carvings that you see here at the end of the room, he considered to be junkers, and he gave those away, and now they've come back to us. Let me turn the motor off on this so I don't have to shout over it. Now let me tell you a little bit more about the raw materials that he used. He read where the ancient Egyptians and made pieces of ebony and ivory and put them into the pyramids, and they lasted for thousands of years. And so he was really excited when he was finally able to use these materials that would last forever. This is the second heaviest and hardest wood in the world. You can pick it up if you'd like to. It weighs 65 pounds. It sinks like a rock if you throw it into a body of water. Elephant tusk ivory was easy to get back in those years. No problem with poaching, plenty of elephants. In fact, the hollow portion is the part that goes up inside the elephant's face. It's filled with nerves and roots like our teeth. The other 2/3 is solid ivory. Have you ever picked up a tusk before? It's heavy. It really is amazingly dense and heavy. The rest of you are welcome to pick this up if you'd like to. I think you'll be impressed. Down here are some more raw materials that he used. Of course, he started out by using the walnut and the beef bone because those were free materials. His early source of ivory were old cue balls from a pool table. He'd get the chipped ones that nobody else wanted. Coal was free. All he had to do was go down along the tracks and gather it up, and he'd use it to keep the family warm, but also in the carvings. Abalone shell provided mother of pearl that you'll see on the edges of the carvings. He found that if he got good at games that came to town with fairs and festivals, that he could win those abalone shells. The little brown block of wood in the case is called arguto. Arguto grows in South America, and it's a self-oiling or lubricating wood. The oil grows naturally in the wood. He used that in the bearings and the moving parts, so we never oil any of the carvings that you're seeing here today. Here are his knives with 139 interchangeable blades. He designed and made those for himself. You see, he found that he could keep an edge on a knife better than any commercially made knife. And so with those knives and all kinds of hand tools, that's how he did all of the carvings that you're seeing here today. No power tools. He said they just don't feel right. All of these pieces, between 4,000 and 5,000 of them, if you put them together perfectly, you'll have another Empire State Express like you see down there at the end of the case. Come on up for a closer look. I do want to warn you about our slanted glass. It's good for reflection. It's a little hard on heads.
Serious looking blade and stuff right there.
If you have questions for me, this is a great time to ask.
All those blades are games,
Arguto. It's that little square one. If you feel it, it would have a really waxy feel to it, just like it was coated with wax.
On the one up there. No, I'd say those are just all.
In the long side rails that are hanging in that panel, you can see a square with a hole drilled in it. that is a place where he would use our guto, because then the axle or whatever went in there would rub on that, and that then the friction is what draws the oil out of the wood, and that's why we don't have to oil anything today. This little ivory piece here, it almost looks like a hollow pancake griddle. If you look, there's very thin strips of arguto on either side of that, and that would have been because there was a piece that would have slid in and out, back and forth on that. Yeah. He was, and yet he was the most fun-loving genius you'd ever want to meet. Oh, he was a character.
He looked like he would be fun.
Oh, yes. Had stories to tell everybody, jokes that he was always joking with people. He was a practical jokester.
You're okay.
Well, come on in this way and have a seat here in our theater. A little piece of linden or basswood, and those 10 cuts open up into a working pair of pliers. Mooney made about 3/4 of these over his lifetime, guaranteed making a pair in 20 seconds or less, but his fastest time was 9.4 seconds the night he appeared on the Johnny Carson show. Then he moved on to a little bit bigger piece of wood. This time 32 cuts make 3 working pair of pliers. He moved on again to walnut, 10 times harder than the linden or bass. 82 cuts make 7 working pair. He later said this one represented his family tree. He said, Frida and I have 5 children, Tom, Florence, Alice, Wilma, Dave, my wife Frida, and myself. A solid family, our children grow up and leave home, but they come back just like all of the pliers return to the single block of wood. But in 1913, he came home from the steel mill and he told Frida that he had had a vision, and he went out and made 2 walnut blocks that looked just like this one. One block he left solid. The other block he spent 1 hour a day for 64 days, and he put 31,000 cuts into the block with no mistakes and no shavings. When he opened the last tiny cut, he had finished the pliers tree. 511 working pair of pliers. He built a tower to hold it to represent the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and he displayed this at the Chicago World's Fair in the 1930s. Robert Ripley, Ripley's Believe It or Not, came to see it, but he didn't believe it. And so they spent more than 2 hours folding and counting all of those tiny little pliers. When that whole tree was folded up tight, the block looked exactly like this one. Ripley was thrilled. He wanted that for one of his Believe It or Not collections. Mooney said he'd never make another one of those, even if he lived to be 1,000. He wasn't about to give that one away either, and the only thing he gave Ripley was a single pair of pliers, like he gave everybody else. Years later, when mathematics professors studied the tree, they told him it was impossible for anyone with a 2nd grade education to have figured all of that out. And he said, boy, I'm glad you told me that today rather than the day before I started it. Now, in this program, you'll learn a lot more about his life and the carvings, and he'll tell you with an old audio tape how he did that tree and how no one believed him.
It has been 9 years since the 5-year-old boy found the knife in the road. 4 since the stranger whittled him the crude set of pliers. Mooney is now a young man whose skills and imagination helped speed production at the steel mill, making men's jobs easier and safer.
Pop worked in a steel mill starting at the age of 14.
I was that shearman right here.
As a hold-up on the shears, worked himself up to shearman quite quickly because of his abilities. He was a character in the mill. He made shoe caps for the safety toes long before they were in vogue because a lot of guys got their feet smashed, bars of steel dropping on them.
Over there, Johnny Stuss eating his rhubarb pie. See, Bill man had no lunchtime. We just sit down anywhere, grab the bucket, clamp it between our knees, and get him his bowls half. He'd say, how to get his jaws to move? Just get them hungry, they'll eat.
The shears was hard. He was the lightest man in the mill, and he had to take a pack of steel across the shear table. And he got the idea if he could drill a little hole and put a ball bearing in it, and let the ball bearing stick out, it would glide over. And he just about got fired for doing that. As far as they're concerned, he ruined the table of the shears. But when the shearmen got to working on them, they thought that was great. And it was done all over the world then after that.
And like mills were in those days, here's old Pat Murphy in the cold bit of the bottle. Taking a drink, but it ain't what you think it is, that buttermilk he's drinking. What? Yeah, that buttermilk. I can prove it, because when he died, they didn't have to embalm him. And he's better preserved than an Egyptian mummy.
Mooney needed better tools himself. He was frustrated with knives that didn't conform to his needs or his hands.
Well, Dad was getting pretty serious at carving as a late teenager. He wasn't satisfied with store-bought knives, so he made his own. And this is what he made. Design and make of his own. The object was a big handle that filled the hand from cramping, long hours of use. A hump that developed to fit between the fingers, locked it right in, a wonderful feel. All the power's in the handle. Made little blades, kept in the handle, and interchangeables. Back spring popped up, there it popped down and holds it in. And he always said when you carve, if the blade is longer than your thumb, for most carvings, the blade will get in your root. There's a frame of knives, 6 knives and 139 blades that he designed, built, and used. The 139 blades in that frame, every one of them will fit in this knife. Interchangeable.
Mooney built this beautiful and functional ivory-handled knife with its interchangeable blades to fit his hand perfectly. This design has become a knife for family members only and is not offered for sale.
Here's the old fireplace where he did the shop and also done the forging. The anvil is sitting there where the commando knives are forged and many other knives that I've made before him.
When tempering the steel blades, Mooney thought that if this carving knife would keep its edge and remain sharp while carving ebony and ivory, it would certainly make a great kitchen knife. So in 1902, at age 17, he crafted his first kitchen knife for his mother. And soon she was showing her friends and neighbors. The townfolk were impressed, and Mooney received lots of orders, and so the knife business was born. In 1905, he designed his most functional and best received paring knife, which he named Old Faithful. This 3-inch blade paring knife gained immediate popularity in the kitchen, and over 100 years later, it is still our best-selling paring knife. Today, 3rd and 4th generation Warthers continue to make their living as knife makers and still use Mooney's specifications to create fine kitchen cutlery. The Warther Knife Shop combines the finest American tool steel with old-world craftsmanship. Dale Warther, Mooney's grandson, grinds on an 8-inch wheel, just as Mooney did. The 9 hand grinds and polishes, and the Warther trademark swirl creates a long-lasting heirloom in cutlery. Dave Warther still hones the final edge of every knife, while his wife Joanne and daughter Carol sort and package the knives for sale in the gift shop. Whether you are using Old Faithful or any of the other 17 styles of knives we make, you will experience the quality and durability that are the hallmark of the Warther tradition. Some of our knives, bought 3 and 4 generations ago, are still being used by the same families. One of Mooney Warther's mottos was, "Build everything to last forever." That meant families, too. This was a man who loved his wife and partner, Frida, and adored children, his own and everyone else's. He gave as much energy, time, love, and imagination to them as he did to his work. Frida created beautiful Swiss gardens around the house and workshop. The gardens are still planted and maintained by the Warther family to this day. The palette of colors surrounded by oceans of green is dazzling on a summer's day. Frida also collected buttons, thousands of all types, some of historic significance and others that